Now we all have to watch what we say.
Somebody was fired at my wife's company yesterday for not realizing that meetings were recorded, and that was pretty interesting. I mean, you would think you would know.
So
Right?
did they like say something inappropriate or do something inappropriate?
Yeah, they said something negative and derogatory about one of the team members whom she manages. And so that got back, and it's like, yep, don't be they have a no a-holes rule at her
Policy.
company. So yeah.
Well, it's 12:03. What, Nate?
That should be applied everywhere.
Yeah. Well, Colin, if you want to take over and go ahead, it looks like we've got a good amount of people here, and I'll just keep letting them in if they come.
For sure. That sounds like a plan. Everybody, happy, what day is it? Happy Wednesday. The 5th of October. Can everybody see my screen here with this? I believe this is a feather or a palm leaf. Everybody see that? Looks very nice.
Yeah, we see it, Colin.
Okay, good. I hate to disappoint you, but there aren't too many design elements in the rest of this presentation. Sometimes I get them to look really nice, and sometimes it's just a bunch of words that are in black and white. So
that's it. No graphics. I'm leaving.
No graphics, totally boring, right? What did Liz say yesterday in the team meeting? Really boring charts. It's like, well, hey, that's all we're about here in the mortgage business. For those of you that haven't been on the call, like Chelsea, good to see you again. This is what we do every Wednesday. Sometimes it's really interactive and really in detail, but we always try and cover something that is something you can learn and take out there to even more enhance your sales process on the buy side when talking about mortgages. Again, I don't think that any buyer's agent needs to be a mortgage expert, but any little thing that you might be able to take, some little nugget here or there, we are all about that. So we do these every Wednesday. Today, if I can get this to work, we're going to talk about numerous ways that we can talk to buyers about utilizing home equity that they might have for new home purchases. And for anybody that's new to the call, just jump in here, interrupt me. It's not rude at all. The more that you interact, the better things are. So this should be about 20 minutes. And any questions that you guys have along the way, please don't hesitate to speak up. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to cover today is the most common, I guess, intermingling of terms is whether you can get a home equity line or a home equity loan or a bridge loan. And Steve has been doing this since 1978. And to this day, he'll call me and say, can these guys get a bridge loan to go non-contingent? And the reality is that that's not wrong, but there's a difference between a home equity loan and a bridge loan, okay? A home equity loan, and you'll hear HELOC a lot, right? Can I get a HELOC? Well, what the heck is a HELOC? A HELOC stands for a home equity line of credit, which is where you borrow against the equity that is in your home, and then as you pay that equity back, the amount of credit is replenished exactly like a credit card, right? Let's say that you've got a credit card with a $15,000 limit, and you have spent $10,000 on that credit card, you've got $5,000 remaining. Well, you make a $10,000 payment to that credit card, you're now back up to that original 15. A home equity line of credit works exactly the same way as a credit card, although mainly at a much lower interest rate or APR, right? HELOCs typically will go up to about 90% combined loan to value. And combined loan to value we'll get into in a minute, but combined loan to value means what is your mortgage now, the first mortgage? What is the new home equity line of credit going to be balance-wise? And you put those together, it should be combined up to 90% CLTV. So you've got a $400,000 house, 90% of 400,000 would be 360,000. That would be your 90% CLTV. The advantage of a home equity line of credit is that you're going to have that higher CLTV ceiling versus a bridge loan. You're going to have a lower rate and lower costs than a bridge loan, but variable, right? So when we talk about home equity lines of credit, unlike a lot of first mortgages out there, FHA, conventional, VA, where you have a fixed rate for 30 years, home equity lines typically will be variable depending on what the prime interest rate is. So when you talk about the Fed raising the Fed funds rate, that will affect home equity loans a lot as well, because let's say you got a HELOC last year at 4%, it might be all the way up to 8%. Granted, it might only be on that $15 or $30 or $45,000, but that rate is variable. Okay, so compare that to a bridge loan for a minute. A bridge loan is only for homes that are listed on the MLS. Hard stop. Okay, so if the property's not on the MLS, then a bridge loan does not apply. And sometimes it's good to get out in front of this, because bridge loans are a heck of a lot more expensive, typically about a point to a point and a half more in interest than a home equity line of credit. And then you're going to have higher costs than a home equity line of credit on a bridge loan. And you're also going to have lower CLTV limits. Sometimes bridge loans will only go to 70%. So your borrowing power is a lot less. Now let's think about why that is. It's because banks really don't like to do loans for a short amount of time. And by banks, I mean credit unions, anybody, right? They think, okay, we're taking the risk now of lending against a home that is currently on the market. We know that home's going to sell. And when that home sells, that bridge loan is going to be paid off, right? So we have to figure out a way to make money on this thing, because we have to draw up the docs. We've got to do all of this work for a loan that might only be in existence for 2 or 3 months, right? So what do? They say, we can either make money on rate or we can make money on fees. And for bridge loans, they do both, right? They charge you a high interest rate, and then they charge you maybe, depending on the loan size, $2,000, $2,500 in fees to execute a bridge loan. So home equity loans are a lot better because the bank doesn't know that you're going to sell the property, right? So if you can get out in front of this, for example, and say, I want to establish a home equity line of credit on my property that I can use for buying a new property non-contingent down the road, and I might just leave that balance at zero until I need that money, right? You can't pay anything on zero, right? So a home equity loan is always good to establish. And I always say it's better to get access to cash when you don't need it than when you do need it. So questions about this disparity between home equity loans, home equity lines of credit, and bridge loans?
For a bridge loan, hold on. Why does the property have to be on the MLS? Like you're saying, like it couldn't be like an off market or something like that. I guess like why is that an important detail?
It alerts the bank that the property is going to be sold, right? So I use the phrase on the MLS loosely. Chelsea, are you saying like the property could be off market? Say a little bit more about that, just so I understand your question.
Well, I guess like a couple months ago, like a lot of properties were just selling like word to mouth. And so that's, I guess, kind of like where I'm like, oh, they don't qualify, like if it doesn't go public, or you could, throw it on the MLS and just, have the basic information on it anyways.
Oh, yeah, that's all cool. I mean, that's all. If the property's not, if you're talking about off-market listings or pocket listings or whatever, I mean, you can still get HELOCs. You can still get a loan on that, right? So my overall point is that HELOCs are better than bridge loans, right? And so just because the property is on the MLS, that's what alerts the bank like, oh, this is a bridge loan. Okay. So if you're talking about the property never having been listed, there's no reason why that seller can't get a home equity line of credit. Cool. Good question. And that's good.
Can
What's up,
I was-
Delana?
Hi, I was just going to ask a question about HELOCs. Not today. We'll save that one for another time. Regarding HELOCs, if a person is intending to sell their property and let's say they want to make some big updates to get the most value out of it when they go on the market, if they get a HELOC, does that impact their credit or anything like that in a way that would prevent them from then qualifying for a mortgage if they were looking simultaneously for a new home?
Yeah, great question. I think that you're going to have a credit pull. So HELOCs are loans that require a hard credit pull. So let's say somebody goes to, I don't know, what's a credit union, Genesis Credit Union or Truestone Federal Credit Union, right? And they go to apply for a home equity line of credit, okay, for home improvements. Then there's going to be a hard pull on the three bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. But, you know, that if you think back a couple sessions ago, I mean, those inquiries are only 10% of the credit score. So, I mean, you know, that might affect their credit a handful of points, right? And then the only other thought that I would have is how leveraged, it's an installment loan, right? It's not a revolving line. So, you know, it's not like a credit card that you're going to run up. Let's say you have $25,000 worth of improvements and you're going to put them all on a credit card. Well, that use of account is going to be a lot, you know, more damaging on a credit card than it would be on an installment loan, like a mortgage, a home equity line of credit. So I would say, I mean, the answer is yes, it will affect their credit. But I think that a HELOC is the safest way to pay for those improvements in anticipation of moving. I think the other thought would be, you know, okay, you have a home equity. I mean, there's no reason why you can't simultaneously apply, right? Let's say you had that situation where somebody wants to do X number of dollars of improvements. And hey, we want to make sure that we're still going to qualify for a new mortgage over here. There's no reason why you couldn't do, you know, simultaneous pulls with a credit report being good for 90 days, figure out where the client is at. Maybe they're really close to 680, you know, and then 680, you know, typically if you're below 680, now you're in jeopardy where maybe you have to go FHA or things like that. Maybe they're at 800 and it doesn't matter a lick, right? So, I mean, I think that engaging a mortgage professional and being like, okay, let's get this HELOC squared away and let's figure out where you are credit-wise, just to make sure that you're not damaging your ability to, you know, buy that next home. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And then my follow-up question to that would be, for a HELOC, is that applied through the person who is holding the mortgage on the current property, or how does that work?
Yeah, typically not. It can be done, but if you think about how liens are held, that's a really good question. Let's say that US Bank, pick on them for a second, US Bank holds your current mortgage. And if you look at this slide, I'll do it in conjunction with this slide. So you have a home that's worth $400,000, okay? And you have a current mortgage with US Bank for $240,000, right? Which means you've got 40% equity in this property, all right? Sometimes if you go to US Bank and you say, hey, I want a home equity line of credit up to 90% loan to value, combined loan to value, right? So I want you to give me $120,000 HELOC on top of the $240,000 that I already owe you. That's still a pretty safe bet, right? I mean, you're still going to have at the end of the day, $40,000 in equity in that property, but sometimes banks will say no, strictly because they don't want to hold both liens, right? If you think about it, US Bank is saying, hey, we're in pretty good shape here. We've got $240,000 loan on a property that's worth a whole lot. You know, if it defaults, there's a lot of equity in that property. And so if US Bank is approached by the homeowner and they say, hey, we want to do a HELOC, you know, they might say, maybe only to 80%. Well, why? I thought you guys are doing 90%. Well, the issue is that we already hold the first mortgage, right? So if we hold the first mortgage and the second mortgage, now we've got two liens by the same company, the same lender on the same property. right? So it's an added layer of risk. We do HELOCs at Flex. I don't do a lot of them. I always tell people, credit unions are your friend when it comes to HELOCs. So sometimes mixing it up a little bit and saying, all right, I've got a mortgage over here with US Bank, and I'm going to go to TrueStone to get a home equity line of credit. Sometimes that can allow you a little bit more borrowing power so that you're not stacking two liens with the same lender on the same piece of collateral, the same house.
Great feedback. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Did I answer? I kind of forgot what the original question was. I went off on a tangent.
No, that was super informative. I appreciate that.
Okay, cool.
Hey, Colin, it's Danielle.
What's up?
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm super good. Question, how long do banks usually carry a person on a bridge loan? 30 days? Like, well, how does that work even?
They will collect 8.5% interest for as long as you let them.
Okay, that's a
Right?
good answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. So they could sit, I mean, because I have clients in South Dakota and they're like, well, maybe we'll get a bridge loan, but we're not moving until next spring, but we want to come and look at houses now. And it's like, these houses aren't going to be on the market next spring and nobody's going to carry. Well, I mean, I don't know. Will somebody carry them on a bridge loan for that long if they qualified? I don't know.
Not a bridge loan, but a home equity line of credit, right?
Yeah,
You
they
gotta
don't
think
have
about-
that. That's not an option for them.
Really?
So, no, they have no equity in their home in South Dakota. They need to sell it to, I mean, like very little, like $30,000 maybe.
Okay. All right. And again, remember,
And so I've been trying to manage their expectations with looking at houses when they come to Minnesota because they just are like, I told them like, these aren't going to be available. And they're like, we don't care. And it's like, I need to value my time too. So
what
I'm
kind of
just
price
curious.
point? Are you cool talking
Oh.
about this a little bit? Like what kind of price point?
300.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Do they have like jobs here and any of that
Well,
lined up? or-
they're going to be transferring with the companies they're with, which are like media or like she works for CenturyLink or something, like where they have locations here so they can transfer.
Okay. Yeah. So the thought is, if you go back to this previous slide,
Yep.
the thought is that a bridge loan would be such a lower limit, right? I mean, with them having limited equity in the house, it kind of hamstrings them a little bit. And I've
Yeah.
got some creative solutions that we'll get to a little bit later in this presentation. But, again, that would be a client where it makes all the difference when they execute the home equity line of credit. You got to remember that
Right.
we're talking about home equity lines of credit as a vehicle for buying something non-contingent, right? But home equity lines of credit are used for a number of different purposes, right? Home improvement, like Jelena mentioned, debt consolidation, sending somebody to college, right? I mean, there are a lot of different options that home equity lines are used for. And so the thought is those will be forever, right? I mean, you could set up a home equity line of credit for $50,000 and it might cost you $1,000 to execute, right? And never ever use it. I mean, you may never ever use a home equity line of credit and then you're not paying anything, right? Because you can't pay interest on nothing, right? If you haven't drawn
Right.
it out. So, I mean,
Right.
that's kind of what my thought would be is, and with them, that might be a difficult situation with no equity, but the whole goal here is, if it costs you very little and it gives you potential flexibility and it doesn't put you into that lower category of this is a bridge loan, it's going to be a short, the bank doesn't know that you might be moving in 3 months. For all they
Right.
know, you're getting this home equity line of credit for, paying off credit card debt or whatever it may be. So,
Right.
yeah, setting
Okay,
that
well,
up
that
earlier.
helps.
Yeah.
I think their situation is they really need to just sell their house in South Dakota and make a plan to move to Minnesota, maybe stay with some people and buy a house. I don't see how they're going to have a lot of wiggle room, so.
Right. Or
Pretty tight.
contingent,
Yeah, they could do a contingency. So we'll see what spring brings with them. but thank you.
Yes. And to just kind of circle back and close that point, you know, you think about bridge loans versus HELOCs, right? I mean, if you're talking about 70% CLTV on a HELOC, you know, somebody might only have $40,000 in equity. Well, if, you know, they own a $400,000 house and they're buying something that's $550 and they want to put 20% down, that's $110K, you know, if they wait until the home's on the market and they get painted into a corner of a bridge loan, you know, they may only have a third of the equity that they had accessible to them, which then says, now we're talking about contingent, now we're talking about other sources, etc. So, any questions on just that whole structure before we talk about qualifying non-contingent with a HELOC?
I have one more quick question for you. On a bridge loan, is an appraisal required on their current home to establish its value, or how is that done?
It depends on the loan to value. And all lenders are different, so I don't want to give a really definitive answer. But oftentimes it depends how much you need. And then some lenders will say, okay, we'll go to 80% of the county tax value, which we all know is low, right? So they pull up the Hennepin County tax record. There's the assessed value there. Hey, we'll go to 80% of that, but and we don't need an appraisal, right? And they say, I need a little bit more. Okay, then we'll do an appraisal. You know, so a lot of banks have different underwriting requirements for how much they'll let you get with or without an appraisal. But I mean, typically, if you're going to go to the max, let's say 90 or even 95%, yes, appraisal all day long, right? If you've got a ton of equity or you've got a property that's paid free and clear and you just want to do a HELOC for a third of its value or half of its value, probably pretty unlikely that you'll need an appraisal, which will save you $500.
Okay, thank you for that information. It just kind of helps get an idea of maybe fees that would go along with it in the event a client asked.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk mortgage gobbledygook here. A lot of fun acronyms on this page. Okay, so if you're going to qualify non-contingent with a HELOC, there are 3 payments to consider, right? You got your current first mortgage, and PITIA means principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and HOA dues, if applicable, right? So you've got your current mortgage. Let's say you got a townhome and you've got taxes and insurance that are escrowed in the loan, and it's $1,500 a month, and you got a $300 a month HOA. Okay, so you got that $1,800 to consider, right? And then you've got the new first mortgage, right? So, hey, we're leveraging a HELOC. We're keeping our current property. We're going non-contingent. We're going to put down, you know, this $100,000 that we're taking from the HELOC, and our new mortgage payment is going to be $3,000 with, you know, taxes and insurance. Okay, so you've got the $1,800 on the departure residence meaning the property they're selling, and then you've got, you know, $3,000 on the new property. So now you're at $4,800, and then you got the HELOC payment, and people forget this sometimes. Okay, so you're qualifying with those 3 payments, which can be tricky in a higher interest rate environment, right? Depending on how much the client makes and what their debt to income ratio is. The HELOC payment is always on what's drawn. Okay, so you might draw on a HELOC, you know, that's $100,000 line, and you only need 50. It does not mean that you're getting, you know, hit on debt to income for the entire amount max of the line. It is only about what you've drawn. Okay, and then the other thought is, depending on the structure, a lot of home equity lines of credit can be interest only. Okay, interest only, if you're not familiar with how that works, basically it is, hey, you are just covering the interest. You're not actually paying the principal of that home equity line of credit. Okay, so let's say that you have a, can everybody see this calculator now? Now it's getting real, right? All right, so you've got, let's say that you've got $30,000, and that's at 5.25%. Okay, And it's an interest only. So that means what's the interest at 5.25% on 30 grand? It's $1,575 a year. All right. Your payment's only 131 buckaroos. So, you know, that's different than a fully amortizing second mortgage, right? Where it's paid off over 10 or 15 or 20 years at a more fixed rate. So a lot of times an interest only product can help people. And I know that sounds a little bit like, okay, that sounds a little 2007, right? Okay, we're paying interest only on these loans, like what? But remember, most of the time, this HELOC is going to be paid off in a handful of months, right? I mean, when you turn around and sell this property, the first mortgage gets paid off and the HELOC gets paid off. So it can give people that are really tight, that want to go non-contingent and draw on a HELOC, a little bit more wiggle room where they set up an interest only HELOC and then they're only being hit for that small interest only amount versus a fully amortizing loan that might be a fixed rate, but it also might be $400 a month. And that might make the difference between qualifying non-contingent and not qualifying non-contingent. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Colin,
Mm-hmm.
how long can you do an interest only HELOC? Is there a max?
Banks love them, man.
So if said person had a balance of 395 but value of 500, could they take 105 draw and buy an investment property if they had an interest only payment, or would you cash out refi that and use that money to purchase another house?
Depends on what their first mortgage interest rate is, right? I mean, I think it would be a conversation about, hey, if you're at, 4.95% on that $395,000 first mortgage, yeah, maybe cash out might make some sense, if we can ever get rates to come down. If they're at 2.95%, don't touch that. That's a huge amount of your money that is under a very low interest rate umbrella. Take a HELOC, right? And I want to clarify one thing just from a math perspective. Remember, you said 505,000. I mean, they would be maxed at that 90% CLTV most likely. So they're not going to be able to get 105 or 110, but in this example, they could probably get about 60. And then, yes, we are going to talk about investment properties in a second, but did that make sense, Austin? No,
yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And that's always a good conversation to have. I saw somebody else had a client came to me for a second opinion and they said, hey, I need $30,000 to do something. And they said, somebody at another lender had recommended that I just do a cash out refinance. And I said, you're at 2.75%. Like, absolutely not. Do not do that at all. Okay. Do a home equity line of credit, right? I mean, why would you do a cash out refi at 6.5? Like, don't do that. So, and I'm sure the other mortgage banker meant well, but those are important considerations in terms of getting into the guts, getting into the math of what actually makes sense in a cash out refi versus a HELOC. One more thing, Austin, as I droned on, remember, cash out refinances are capped at 80% loan to value. Okay. So a HELOC is going to give you, I'm sorry, let me back up. Conventional cash out refinances are capped at 90% loan or at 80% loan to value, right? So in that instance, somebody only has, they're above 80%. They're right at 80%, right? So, I mean, a cash out wouldn't make any sense for them anyway, because there's not a lot of room there. So a HELOC would definitely be the best choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got one option with another lender. They do a 90-10, but the fees are, a pretty penny on it. So
yeah, right. Okay, let's talk about some alternatives to HELOCs. whenever somebody comes to me, and certainly it happened a hell of a lot in the past couple of years, in the craziness of 20 and 21, and they said, hey, we absolutely need to get non-contingent. Our realtor told us, okay, let's do it. I will always say, borrow from the bank as a sort of last resort. What do I mean by that? If you can borrow the money from yourself or from a family member, I am all about that versus borrowing the money from a traditional lender. And I know that sounds silly because it's like, wait a minute, aren't you a lender? Aren't you a broker? It's like, yeah, but I also don't like people wasting money when they don't know they're wasting money. So I will always explore alternatives to HELOCs, especially if you are indeed selling your current home. These are ones that I think can be more beneficial than a HELOC or bridge loan. Number one, gifts. Okay. I remember buying a property in 2016 in which the builder made me go non-contingent, and I knew I was going to sell my house in Eagan quickly. And so I approached my parents. I approached Bank of Mom and Dad, and I said, here's what I think. Can you make this happen for me? And they did. And we sold the house in Eagan quickly, and I paid them back. That is option number one. Okay. That's the cheapest way to go. Sometimes, I mean, mom and dad might be, looking for a small return on that, even though we call it a gift. My parents made me, they charged me prime, I think 4.5% interest only is what they charged me. But gifts are a great option, right? So it's like, hey, I need this money. I'm going to sell this property. It's just that I need to go non-contingent. I'll pay you back, etc. Okay. That costs a lot less, and it's a lot less red tape than going through a HELOC approval process, right? 401k loans. Notice I said loans and not distributions. It's like, I don't want to touch money from my 401k. I'm going to get taxed on that. Okay. Didn't say that. Loans, right? 401k loans are usually $50. You go to your company administrator and say, hey, how much can I possibly borrow from my 401k? I'm borrowing that money from myself. That gets paid back in every paycheck. And I can go and turn around and pay off that 401k loan as soon as my house sells. That's $50, $100. And, the interest is something that, you are covering as part of your paycheck. I mean, that's a lot less in cost and in rate, right, than a bridge loan or HELOC. So those are sort of the first two that I present. Is there a chance you can do A or B, a gift or a 401k loan? And then if that's not an option, then we'll go down that HELOC road. Questions about those? Has anybody executed something like that or seen that in action? Okay. All right, Austin, let's get into this a little bit. So HELOCs for investment properties. I remember in 2013, 2014 that my friend Denny Bennett, who now works at US Bank, kind of brought me into the mortgage business, and we were doing a loan on an investment property, and somebody was using a HELOC on their current primary residence. And I'm like, you can't do that. Like that doesn't seem right to me. What? And he said, no, a HELOC is absolutely an acceptable use of down payment for investment properties. So you can leverage the equity that's in your current primary residence to buy an investment property. Now, those same qualifying rules apply, right? You've got 3 payments to account for, but the nice thing about buying an investment property this way is that you're able to offset some of the mortgage payment with the rental income, right? So if you're going to go buy an investment property, you're going to put 20% down, 25% down using a HELOC. Okay, we're going to count your current mortgage and we're going to count your HELOC payment against you for qualifying. And then let's say your new mortgage on this investment property is $2,000, right? But let's say that it rents for $2,000. Well, 75% of that rent can be used toward qualifying. So whereas your new payment would have hit you for $2,000. The mortgage company is only hitting you for $500 because it rents for $2,000, 75% of that is $1,500. Your sort of cash flow debt to income analysis, you're only getting hit for $500. So that is a benefit to buying a property with a HELOC that is investment. Okay. And really, there are no other unique rules to using a HELOC for investment properties, other than the HELOC lender might want to know what it's for. Okay. And they might hit you for, okay, well, we need to figure out what the DTI is, right? In other words, if you're really toward the max, and they say, well, you're using this money to go buy an investment property, we need to identify what that is, but that's really rare. So Austin, I wanted to engage you a little bit here because you were nice enough to offer up this topic. Is this something that you see out there frequently? Is this something that you've been kind of kicking around? Is it something that maybe some investors don't necessarily know if they're just getting into real estate ownership?
This is for my number one client, which is myself.
Never heard of them.
For future purchases.
Sure. So a home equity line of credit on a primary residence, up to 90% loan to value, right? And then you use that toward the purchase of a new property. It really is pretty simple.
Nice. I like it.
I'm going to step in here too, because a question I get from a lot of people is, how do we prepare this on the purchase agreement? Is it cash or is it a finance option? And to that, I always answer people, well, is it done or is it not? Right? Like, is the financing, is the HELOC loan complete and they have access to that already, or are they applying for that loan? And the same with the bridge loan. So that's what you guys, when writing the purchase agreement, would need to know the difference, because I do just get asked a lot, is this considered cash or not? And the answer really is, do they have access to the funds right now at their fingertips, or are they just starting the process for that?
And Cassie, you're talking about, I'm taking a HELOC to buy cash, a new property, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or the bridge loan. And so people often ask me, how do I complete the financing portion of the purchase agreement? Do I indicate this is cash or do I indicate it's financing? And the answer just really lies on whether that financing is complete already.
Yeah. And if you're, I think that's a great point. And if you're doing a combo, right? If you're doing a combo where, hey, we're just using this HELOC for a down payment, I think then it's on the new first mortgage lender, to specify that or not specify it in the pre-approval letter. In other words, hey, yeah, we got 30%. We just need to go get a HELOC. It's like, okay, well, I'll tell you what, pre-approval letter is going to have language in it that says subject to you getting approval for a HELOC.
Right.
Great point. Really good point.
Okay, can I jump in and ask kind of both of you a question then? So in a hypothetical situation where someone is cashing out on a HELOC and they want to use all of that to buy a investment property, but it's the loan part's not completed yet, we would write the contract that it's contingent to financing. But do we then have to alter the contract with an amendment once the cash is available and they're then paying cash?
I wouldn't say so, no, because at the time that you drafted the contract, that was the terms of it, right? I mean, everyone knows that that's what's going on from the get-go.
Okay, I'm just wondering because technically that would be an amendment to the type of financing then, if they were going from a loan to having the cash on hand then to pay.
Well, not really, because the loan is providing them. I mean, if you think about it, any type of loan is providing a person, quote unquote, cash on hand to pay for it, right? I mean, whether that's a mortgage or a HELOC or what have you.
Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to know, if there would just be an extra step in the process to have to do
Yeah, I
paperwork.
would-
But if not, that's simple.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there necessarily would be. I've actually never been asked this question. I'm happy to, if anybody else wants to jump in on this and weigh in. But I would just say no, because at the beginning, you're indicating that they're getting financing. And once you're approved for that financing, doesn't really matter to the seller whether you get the 100 grand dumped in your bank on October 14th or October 30th, the close date, you know? It was still contingent on financing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Could I just say one thing? The only hiccup you could have is that HELOC lenders sometimes don't know how to do multiple things, right? And so, you know, if you have something that's contingent on financing and then you have a written statement date and the HELOC lender is like, what the hell? Right? I don't know how to do that, you know? That could be one issue that you run into, right? I mean, and then if you have a client that is sort of like, oh, I didn't tell my HELOC lender that I was buying a new house, you know, and they're right up against the qualifying range, right? And then you got to hit them for taxes and insurance on this new property they're buying, and boom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's where you have to probably, as the real estate agent, when a buyer indicates that they're doing this, is doing a little bit more digging and having those one-on-one conversations with the lender so that everyone has a clear picture of what's actually going on.
All right. Anybody else before we jump into the last slide? I said 20 minutes. It's been 45, but that's good. I love this. Okay. Talked a little bit about delayed financing. So this is something that we've seen be more common in the marketplace. I was talking to Sue Wolf the other day. You know, she's like, why the hell are all these offers cash? And I said, well, it's because a lot of these companies have set them up that way, right? Home Point, you know, you see these companies, Ribbon, you know, a number of others come to mind, where essentially they will offer you the option where they will pay cash for the property, and then you work with them to do a refinance after the property is sold and closed. Okay. It's an option called delayed financing. And whether it's cash that's paid by the lender or whether it's just you paying cash, it's essentially a way to get a mortgage where you put cash up front and then you do a cash out refinance, which is capped to 80% on the property, right? The kind of hurdles that you have to go through here, it's not too bad, but you've got to prove that you did in fact pay for the property in cash. If you got cash from mom and dad or third parties, then you need to prove the documented source of the initial funds. Okay, so let's say I said, you know, same kind of deal. Hey, mom and dad, I'm gonna buy this property and I want you to float me 350 grand. Let's pretend my parents were that nice. Okay. Then I would just need to come back and I'm going to do a cash out refinance down the road. I'll pay you back. I'm going to get a loan for, what is that? $280,000. All right. Then I would just need to prove with the mortgage lender that that money came from mom and dad, that it was a gift, etc. But delayed financing is a hotter topic. I mean, I think with the softening of the market, it's become a little bit less hot of a topic, but it is an option that borrowers can use to pay for a property with cash, use the advantages in negotiation that come with cash buying, and then turn around and leverage the property and essentially replenish any cash reserves that they may have used. Questions on delayed financing at all? One thing I'll note, typically you'll see a 6-month waiting period. You do not have a 6-month waiting period with delayed financing. So this is something that you can do quickly after the deed is recorded with the county.
So there wouldn't be any issue in the event that mom and dad decided to cash out a bunch of stock and give that whole gift to their kids to buy a property cash so they could compete. I did experience this several times in the last 2 years. And then the idea is that after the purchase closes, they go out and get themselves a standard mortgage somewhere for the property and pay mom and dad back the cash.
Right. If it's less than 6 months after closing, fewer than 6 months, I should say, then you're going to need to get that whole paper trail from mom and dad. And mom and dad are going to have to sign a gift letter and, you know, hey, we paid Colin this money so that they could buy this property. These are our stock accounts. These are the equities that we sold. This is how the money, you know, went through title, all that, right? If it's more than 6 months down the road, Fannie doesn't care. You know, all right, great, cash out refi. Sounds good. We don't need to see any of that paper trail.
Okay, perfect. So they're just proving money laundering is not going on.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. That's the end of this black and white presentation. I'll try and get some color schemes in here next Wednesday. Any questions on anything, y'all?
No, this is good stuff. Thank you for everybody who attended.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate y'all. If you want
Colin,
to
you're
talk,
awesome.
no.
Thank you.
Awesome stuff, man. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.